The audio used here was Baldock Chang's Desert Air sound effects. The link will be in the description. This is a story set in the beautiful Amavikka religion Fialleril created. Fialleril can be found on Archive of Our Own and Tumblr. Listen, children, here is a story. One day there was a slave named Kara. Kara was a rebellious slave and was always finding ways to mock Depper. Depper had a big ego, and his pride could not stand to bear such defiance from a lowly slave. He thought that such disrespect was a bad example to the other slaves and would inspire them to disobey him. Depper wanted nothing more than to be rid of Kara. So he brought her to his palace and made her kneel before his throne. He said to Kara, "You have disrespected me too many times. Even when I punish you, you are rebellious. I must show the slaves once and for all what the consequences are for not showing proper deference to Depper." Depper told Kara that she would be taken out into the desert sands and killed. Kara's heart was full of fear, but still she held her head high and looked Depper in the eyes in defiance. She told Depper, "You can kill me, O Depper, but know this. My spirit will live on in the desert and in the people long after your power turns to dust." Depper became enraged at hearing this and ordered the enforcers to put a binding on Kara's mouth so she could not speak any more words of rebellion. So the enforcers bound and gagged Kara and took her out into the desert so as to kill her. But just before they were about to set her detonator off, a wild, raging sandstorm blew in from nowhere. The enforcers and Kara were trapped in the raging sandstorm. The wind raged and howled and blew, but Kara did not feel fear. The sand tore her clothes to shreds and dug into her skin and flesh and left her bleeding, but still she felt no fear. The sand also dug into the bindings around her mouth and arms and tore them open. After the storm had ended, Kara was left bleeding and in pain and feeling like she was going to die. But she didn't die. Slowly, her blood stopped flowing and her strength returned. And she stood up under the light of the 3 moons, all alone and covered in blood. She walked until she came upon something. The tattered jacket of one of the overseers, the jacket that he wore as a uniform. She brought it with her. She kept walking, looking up towards the sky. The stars guided her to a secret oasis hidden in the desert, and here she went to sleep. She woke up in the morning and gathered nuts and leaves and flowers to make her breakfast with. She washed herself in the river, keeping the jacket with her. As the days went by, she walked among the desert like a Kelta, and she gathered strength and healed. The mother's sun shone above her, and the mother's moons gave her sweet, cool water. She went to the Balenka tree, and after asking for the tree for help, she took a piece of its stringy bark and boiled it down into a fine thread. She went to the parchi bush, and after asking the bush for help, she picked off a thin, dry, spiny leaf to use as a needle. She went to the alutha plant, and she asked for some of its white flowers to soak into a juice. Finally, she went to the cactru plant and asked for a piece of sharp cladode. She offered the gifts of water to the plants in return for the gifts they gave her. She used the needle and thread to stitch up the jacket. She then used the juice to dye her desert-parched skin light. She used the cactru cladode to shear her hair down. She caked dust onto the jacket so that all the seams were hidden, and she caked dust onto herself so it looked like she'd been caught in a sandstorm. She put on the jacket, and finally she was ready. Kara went back to Depper's palace, and she bowed low before Depper, and with a deep voice she said, "O great and mighty Depper, I know you are wise and smart and keep track of all your business, and thus have been expecting me to come a day earlier. But I am a foolish one and got caught in a sandstorm. I barely made it out alive. I know that you keep track of all the proceedings in your domain, and therefore expected a new overseer to arrive here yesterday. Please, by your grace, accept my humblest apologies." Now Depper did not expect a new overseer, but he did not want to look stupid, so he simply said, "Well, you better not be late ever again. Now go to the overseer's quarters and make yourself presentable." And so Kara hid herself away as an overseer, but the other slaves recognized her as who she really was. They made sure to keep this fact hidden from Depper, and they conspired together in the darkness of the night. Eventually, they made a plan. Kara took a small group of slaves and went in front of Depper, and she said, "O mighty Depper, these slaves are rebellious and do not want to work. They are saying that they should be set free. Surely we must make an example of them." Depper thought that these slaves must have been inspired by the rebellious Kara who he had killed. He didn't want any of his slaves to get ideas of freedom, so he said, "Take them to the desert lands where Sketo flies, and chain them up so that the Sketo can drain them dry, so that all may know what fate awaits them if they defy the great Depper." And so Kara took the group of slaves. She took the children and the adults and the elders and the babies in their parents' arms, and they went together to the place where Sketo flew. They brought with them water bags full of blood-red sai, and a bundle of cactru cladodes, and the rags of clothes that were too worn down for even the most desperate of people to wear. Upon seeing them, Sketo swooped and snapped, but the people looked at Sketo with dukra in their eyes. Sketo calmed down and said to them, "Who are you to dare to cross me?" A grandmother looked Sketo in the eyes and spoke, "We are the children of Ekrath, and we have come to you with the gift of Sai. In return, we seek your aid so we may walk into the secret oases of the desert without Depper following our tracks." "I know this, Ekrath," responded Sketo, "and I would be very foolish to make an enemy of them. For they are like the desert sands, ever-changing, yet always the same. Fine, I will aid you." So the people gave Sketo a bag of sai to drink. The other bag of blood-red sai they emptied upon the ground. They placed their torn clothes on the ground and stained them with sai, and buried among them they placed the broken cactru cladodes. Finally, Kara placed locked shackles and chains among the clothes. Then the people walked into the desert towards the secret oases of water, and Kara covered their tracks. And Kara went back to Depper and showed him the torn clothes and shackles and the red staining the ground. Depper saw this and thought that surely these rebellious slaves were dead, and he commended Kara for her great work. "You are a very good and loyal overseer," he told her. In the darkness of the night, Kara went back to the hovels of the slaves, and she planned with them further. A few weeks later, a day came when Kara went to stand in front of Depper again, this time bringing a larger group of slaves. "These slaves refuse to work," she told him, "and they refuse to obey your orders. Then they must see that only death awaits those who refuse to obey my orders and work. Take them to the Sarlacc pit so that Sarlacc might eat them." And so Kara bowed low before Depper and took the slaves away. And she went with the people, with the children and the adults and the elders and the babies in their parents' arms. And again they took their rags and their blood-red sai. and they went together to the great pit of Carcoon where the Sarlacc dwells. They stood in front of the pit and started singing. Grandfather Sarlacc emerged from the sand and said to the people, "Why, my grandchildren, are you singing? Do you not know that Depper sits in his palace?" The people replied, "We are singing because soon we will become free. We ask for your help, Grandfather Sarlacc, to become free. Will you help us fool Depper? We have brought for you a gift of Sai." "Why, definitely, children of Ekreth, I will help you become free." So they gave 1 bag of Sai for Grandfather Sarlacc to drink, and 1 bag of Sai they poured over the ground and their rags, which they arranged around the base of Sarlacc's pit. And they went out into the wild places of the desert, and Kara covered their tracks. Kara went back to Depper and showed him the rags and Sai, and Depper was very satisfied indeed, thinking that the slaves had been eaten by Sarlacc. Finally, on the eve of Marukepu, Kara brought together all the slaves, all the children and the adults and the elders, all the babies in their parents' arms, and she stood in front of Depper. "All the slaves are refusing to work," she said, "and not even whipping them is convincing them to do their tasks." Depper grew very enraged, but also grew very frightened. If he killed all his slaves, he would have no one left to work for him, so he told Kara, "Come with me so that we may discuss their punishment." And Kara swallowed down her fear and followed Depper into a secluded room of the palace. Depper turned to her and said, "Do not kill all the slaves this time. Make them believe that you will kill them, but at the last minute turn around as if you are having a great change of heart and ask me for mercy. When I grant them this mercy, they will be so grateful that they will learn their proper place under me." Kara bowed before Depper. "As you wished," she told him. And so she went with all the people out into the desert again, and again they brought with them destroyed clothes and Sai. They kept walking in the sands under the suns. Suddenly, Ekelta strode out from the great distances in the desert and met them. "Ekelta!" the people cried. "Have you come to set us free?" Ekelta let out a great roar into the sky. The people gave her a bag of Sai to drink and spilled the other bag of Sai onto the ground. Then they walked with Ekelta into the oases of the desert. Kara walked with them, and the swishing of Ekelta's tail covered their tracks. Depper thought that all his slaves had been eaten by the mighty Krayt dragon, and he fumed and raged because he no longer had any slaves. That night, Kara thanked the sandstorm and the night and Sketo and Sarlacc and Leia and the desert and the plants and the river for bringing her her freedom. And she thanked her people who were now all free. I tell you this story to save your life.